Chapter 15. It didn't take long for us to get back home. Once again, I put the crystal radio on the kitchen table where it sat, dark and silent. I looked it over. "I don't think anything's broken," I finally said. I wiped a smudge of what I thought was probably fingerprint powder off of the headphones. "Tommy sure was mad," said Olive. Ben nodded. "I'm afraid you have made an enemy, Nolan." I nodded. "An archenemy," said Olive. I nodded again. "A forever and ever archenemy," said Olive. "All right already," I grumbled. "I got it." Olive shrugged. "I'm just saying." Ben cleared his throat. "And now, my young friends, I must be saying goodbye." "But I don't want you to go," Olive said. She slipped her hand into Ben's. I admit I felt a little sad too. Even though the day had been stressful and frustrating and downright weird, I'd sort of gotten used to having Ben around. "I want you to stay forever and ever," said Olive. "Tut," said Ben. "Don't you know fish and visitors stink after 3 days?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "That's dead fish, and you're here right now, and I don't want you to go." Ben dropped to one creaking knee and looked her in the face. "You are a most singular little girl, dear Olive, and if circumstances were different, I would heartily stay with you, but I have my own home and my own family. Did I tell you my grandchildren live with me?" She shook her head, sniffling loudly. "7 little prattlers who cling about their grandpapa's knees, begging for kisses and stories." He winked. "And I have a most special tale to tell them tonight." "About me and Nolan?" "You have become cherished parts of my life." She thought a moment, her lower lip poked out. Then she took a deep breath. "Okay." He smiled. "I am not in so much of a hurry that I would pass up a hug. That is, if you were inclined to give one." Olive laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck. The two squeezed each other tight. Then Ben slowly straightened. "Master Nolan, I place myself in your most capable hands. Where would you have us begin?" I stood there for a second. All day, all I'd wanted was to fix things, make things right by sending Ben home. But now, it sounds crazy, but I didn't want him to go either. "Nolan," said Ben. I shook my head. Right," I said. I looked at the radio. "I think we should do exactly what we did this morning," I finally said. "Repeat every step." "Replicate the experiment," said Ben. "Exceedingly wise." I couldn't help but blush. I mean, it's not every day that Benjamin Franklin calls you wise. "What if I don't remember every step?" asked Olive. "Try," I said. "Put on your thinking cap." She did. Flopping into a kitchen chair, she pretended to tie on a hat. I rolled my eyes. Oh, brother. "What would you have me do?" asked Ben. "I think you should go stand over there in the doorway, since that's where you first materialized or beamed up or whatever." Clutching his toy fire hat to his chest, he took his place. "Are you taking that?" I asked, as I cleared trash and dishes off the table. "I certainly am," said Ben. He grinned. "I seem to have misplaced my fur cap, and oh, but the fellows in the fire company are going to be most astonished." I snorted. They must be really easily impressed. That's when Olive pulled off her thinking cap. "I remember," she announced. She reached for the radio. "First I touched this little lever right here." "Wait a second," I said. I looked over at Ben. "You ready?" Ben nodded. "Let the experiment be made, he called out to us. I waved. Safe travels, Ben. Say hi to your grandkids for me, said Olive. She started blowing kisses. Can we do this already? I interrupted. I was trying to stay focused, trying to remember the exact steps, trying not to sound like I was going to cry. She wrinkled her nose at me and finished her smooch. Mwah! Then, as she'd done that morning, she moved the tiny brass arm. I slipped on the headphones. She turned the dial. One click. Adieu, dear children, hollered Ben. 2 clicks. I shall never forget you. 3 clicks. We waited for the stone to start glowing. We waited for the headphones to fill with static. We waited for the room to dissolve and bubbles to pop. Instead, I am still here, said Ben. The crystal radio sat stubbornly silent. We tried again and again. Nothing happened. I don't get it, whined Olive. We did it exactly the same. I peered down at the radio. All the parts were there. But suddenly, I can't explain why, I got the strangest feeling that we were missing a step. We'd forgotten to do something. Ben sagged into a chair. For the first time all day, his eyes didn't twinkle, and his chin drooped to his chest. He let out a big sigh. Ah, Nolan. I had never considered that in this age of wonders, I might not be able to return home. You can stay with us, right, Nolan? Olive grabbed Ben's hand and looked at me hopefully. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, not saying anything. He can sleep in the guest room and wear Daddy's left-behind clothes. I doubted it. Dad's left-behind pants would have to be hemmed at least a foot, and the waistbands let way out. He can help Mom with her books. Ben knows all those colonial people. I glanced up the stairs toward the studio where Mom was still working. Having Ben around would help her. And we could do experiments and build stuff and mermaid swim. She flung her arms wide with excitement. I have to admit, she made it sound pretty nice. Then I looked into Ben's sad eyes and knew it could never work. He had his own home and his own family. He would miss them the same way I miss Dad. He would feel like he was carrying a deep, empty hole inside. Ben dabbed at his eyes with one lace cuff, and Olive wrapped her skinny arms around his neck. Don't worry, Ben. It'll be okay. Sure it will, I added. All we have to do is figure out the radio. I remembered something he'd said earlier. The scientific mind is ever questioning. He looked up. You are quite right, Nolan. We must undertake a thorough scientific examination of that contraption. I nodded. That's the spirit, Ben. Tomorrow. He seemed to sag even further. But I am feeling dropsical. I wasn't sure what that meant, but it didn't sound good. Olive jumped in. I'm hungry. Aren't you hungry, Ben? I think we should eat. I bet that would make you feel less popsicle, bicycle, make you feel better. Good thinking, Olive, I cried, acting like it was the greatest idea since the lightning rod. Remembering how much he'd enjoyed those earlier pizza puffs, I microwaved up another box. Olive even brought him a tankard of ale. Ginger ale, she explained. Still, she'd poured it into a big mug, so it sort of looked like the real thing. Not that it mattered much. Ben just picked at his food. When he finished pushing pepperoni around his plate, he went into the family room and lowered himself into my dad's old easy chair. His hands resting on his knees remained stone still. Not a single finger twitched. He closed his eyes. At the kitchen table, Olive traced the radio's gold block letters over and over. H! She suddenly cried. I bet he knows how the radio works. Yeah, and how are we going to find him? Call him? Maybe he has a phone number. I rolled my eyes. Oh, brother, that might be the stupidest. I stopped. I thought a second. Wait a minute. You might be onto something. Maybe. What? Maybe we can find HH online. You think HH has a website? Or a Facebook page or something? I shrugged. Weirder things have happened today. Olive touched Ben's arm. You want to come with me? I'll let you click the mouse. I thought for sure the phrase, click the mouse, would get him going, but he didn't even open his eyes. No, thank you, dear. Olive's lower lip trembled. She was obviously as worried about him as I was. She and I went into the computer room. Before the divorce, it had been Dad's study, but now all of his books and papers and research materials were gone. Just empty shelves, a table and chairs, and a desktop computer remained. I booted it up and typed the initials HH into the search engine. Ugh, groaned Olive. If HH was online, it wouldn't be easy to locate him. We found hula hoops and headless horsemen, Haircut Haven, the Hilltop Hotel, haunted houses, health hazards, H&H plumbing supplies. There must have been a gazillion HHs. Horatio Hornblower, I read. That's a silly name, I said Olive. I tapped some keys. Herbert Hoover. Who? Said Olive. He was a president, I replied. She shrugged. Who knew? I scrolled through a few more screens, but I was losing hope. Stop! Cried Olive. Did you find something? Hector the Hedgehog's fans club site. I love his cartoons. Can we bookmark that? It was useless. There were way too many possibilities. Just then the computer let out an electric chime. Only one person could be video calling at this time of day. I pushed back from the computer and made for the door as Olive eagerly clicked some keys on the computer. Hi, Daddy, she chirped. I was almost to the door when she turned. Nolan, come talk to Dad. I looked back. Behind her on the computer screen, I could see him smiling. Hello? Nolan? Is that you, buddy? I shut the door in his video face. Ben was leaning forward in his easy chair, his ear tuned toward the study. You do not wish to speak with your father? He said when he saw me. I shook my head. I haven't talked to him in a while, I confessed. Not since he left. Ben took a deep breath. He seemed to be deciding whether or not to tell me something. At last he said, I have another son. Did you know that, Nolan? Besides Frankie? Ben pulled a cotton cloth from his sleeve and polished his glasses. William, he said the name softly. Strange how the word feels on my lips. I have long refused even to utter it. You don't say his name? I no longer speak to him either, said Ben. He shook his head. I no longer see him. Ever? Never. Ben's eyes took on a faraway look. Oh, my dear, brilliant William. And he told his story. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful little boy. Coochie coo. Do you see him there? His name was William Franklin, and he was the apple of my eye. Gah, gah. I was an indulgent father. As he grew, William wanted for nothing. He had the best tutors, the finest clothes, his own horse and carriage. William was always at my side. And he became my partner as I set about making secret preparations for my kite experiment. That's it, my boy. Fly the kite into the very heart of the storm. Zap! Zip! Zip! It is true, Father. Electricity and lightning are one and the same. The success was made sweet because William was there to share it. But then revolution came, and all colonists had to choose. Would they fight for America's freedom or stay loyal to England and its king? I chose America. William chose the king. I felt as if he had turned against me by siding with England. I felt abandoned, and so I turned against him. From here on out, I never want to see or hear from you again. Please, Father, I beg you, do not let political differences come between us. But I did not heed his pleas. Stubborn and self-righteous, I cut him out of my life. I have not seen him since, but not a day goes by that I do not miss him. Olive came out from the computer room then and curled up in a corner of the couch. She looked sad. Video calling with Dad does that to her sometimes. Nobody talked. I guess we were all lost in our thoughts. Chapter 16. I woke with a start on the family room floor. The house had that late-night hush. I looked at the clock. 10:30. On the couch, Olive snored softly. And Ben... Oh, geez, he wasn't in the easy chair. I scrambled to my feet. Not again. The house was dark except for the glow seeping out from under Mom's studio door and the circle of light from the overhead lamp in the kitchen. Phew! Ben sat beneath it at the table. I sighed with relief, opened the window to catch the night breezes, and was now writing something. He looked so sad and serious as he scrawled away with that feather and chocolate pudding that I didn't have the heart to tell him about the invention of the ballpoint pen. Whatever happened to early to bed, early to rise? I asked, sitting down next to him. He looked up with the barest of smiles. That was before the invention of the electrical light. He blew on his paper, I guess to help dry the pudding. I am writing a letter to William. He read the first lines. Dearest William, can a father turn from his son? He cannot. He should not. I have wronged you, William. Wronged you because I felt you'd wronged me. But as a wise lad recently reminded me, 2 wrongs can never make a right. That's nice, I said. He set down his quill. I have discovered many marvels during this extraordinary day, Noland, but methinks this was the most marvelous of them all. He sat at the table in the ring of light, listening to the silence. Ben wore a sad smile, but his eyes were bright. He picked up his quill again and poised it over the paper. Just then, the calm was broken by a white glow. Beside him on the kitchen table, the stone in the center of the crystal radio began to radiate light. Whiter, whiter, crystal white. Startled, Ben pushed away from the table as scratchy static came through the headphones. Nolan, your device seems to be functioning again. I looked at Ben curiously. The static in the headphones grew louder. First, random pops and crackles. Then the noise seemed to form words. Through the static, I thought I heard the word home. What's happening? Asked Olive. She stumbled sleepily into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. The glow from the crystal radio shone on her face. Oh, my gosh, is it on? Her eyes widened. It's on! We gathered around the radio, staring down stupidly. It was Olive who finally sprang into action. Why are we just standing here? We have to send Ben home, quick, before the thing turns itself off again. She didn't have to say it twice. Snatching up his letter, Ben hurried to his place in the doorway. I put on the headphones, and Olive reached for the dial. Then, "Wait!" she cried. She dashed into the family room. The headphones grew louder and the static more insistent. The word home repeated over and over in the whirl of sound. Ben and I looked at each other. "Hurry up!" I cried. Ben looked worried. At last she raced back. She was holding the toy fire hat in her hand. "You can't forget this," she said. She shoved it at him and reached for the dial. "Bye, Benny," she called. "Goodbye, Ben," I said. "I shall always remember you, dear children," said Ben, his voice already garbled and sputtering with static. Click, click, click. The world dissolved, the room once again melting into a blur, then pop! The room seemed to snap back like a rubber band and returned to focus. And Ben was gone. We stared at the empty space for what seemed like forever. I thought about Ben spinning through time in Philadelphia. I hope he got home all right. "He did," said Olive. She pulled out a piece of paper. "I printed this out when I was on the computer, after I talked to Daddy." It was a picture from E-Cyclopedia, a painting of Ben proudly wearing his toy fire hat. I grinned. He looked dorky in 2 centuries. And I realized why Olive insisted he take the hat. So we'd have proof. So we'd know he'd gotten home safe. I looked at the radio. Once again, it had gone dark and silent. I stated the obvious. "This is our secret, Olive. We can't tell anyone about the radio." Olive nodded slowly. "You don't have to tell me that." "Just you and me, Olive," I said. "No kidding," she said. "And never mess around with it again." "Never?" Olive frowned. "That's no fun." Outside the window, a twig snapped. Olive and I looked at each other. "We should have kissed him harder," she said. I thought about the electrostatic machine sitting in the garage, where we'd parked the wagon. "Forget it," I said. "Party pooper," grumbled Olive. And I hollered through the closed curtains. "Good night, Tommy." The only answer was the soft pat of footsteps moving away. With a relieved sigh, I reached over and closed the radio's lid. I felt the gold block letters that read "Property of H.H." It made my fingers tingle. "Maybe H.H. stands for Home is Where the Heart Is," she said seriously. I laughed. And suddenly I thought I understood why the radio had activated, why at that very moment it had come back to life. I repeated what my teacher, Mr. Druff, had said last year. We learn from the past how to live in the present. Then I grinned and added, and vice versa. I was still thinking about it all as I carried the radio into my bedroom. "Don't play with it without me," said Olive from her doorway. "I told you, we're not playing with it ever again." "You're not going to throw it away, are you?" I shook my head. "It was sent to me for a reason. I have to find out what that reason is. But I'll put it away so no one can touch it. Got it?" Just in case, I hid the radio deep in my closet, buried in a box of building blocks. So many strange things had happened, it would take a while to figure them out. I yawned. I'd never felt so tired. But there was one more thing I needed to do before I could sleep. I glanced at the bedside clock. It was morning in London. Plucking my laptop off my desk, I tapped some keys. "Nolan?" "Hi, Dad," I said.